Welcome to On Par, the podcast all about administration that is based on work published in Publication Review. I am Hongtao Yi, editor of the journal, with editors-in-chief Jos Westcouders and Catherine Willoughby. Together with our management analyst, Preston Phillips, through the journal, this podcast, and other affiliate outlets, we hope to bring you the latest information about emerging developments in governments around the world, advance theoretical and conceptual knowledge about governance and government, connect and inform the practitioner and academic communities globally. Today, our guest is Sebastian Shulz, postdoc at the COSTECH Lab and the head of Digital Commons Politics Working Group at CNRS. His research focuses on digital technologies, democracy, and new forms of ecological production. In his research published in the first issue of PAR this year, he examines the democratizing potential of the commonization of digital public goods and services. Sebastian, could you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation. You did a perfect presentation of myself. I'm no more postdoc, but I have a job for the next year in an engineer school, which is called INSAREN. But that's my new job. But yeah, I did my thesis on how digital commons movement try to transform public administration, and that's, I think, what we are going to talk about.
Wonderful. Now to begin, Sebastian, how does the concept of commonization differ from traditional co-production in PA?
Yeah, so we've seen in recent year, and there are a lot of publication in public administration review around co-production. In my view, this growing interest is driven by a mix of calls for administrative modernization, citizen democratic aspirations, and the rise of, let's say, Web 2.0 technology. And there are a lot of scholars that have coined terms like open government, government as platform to describe this. But there is one particular form of co-production that is inspired by the digital commons that have received little attention. And it's a bit paradoxical, I must say, because the notion of co-production was first introduced by Elinor Ostrom and her colleagues. And it's the same Elinor Ostrom who won the Nobel Prize, the so-called Nobel Prize in economics for her works on the commons, right? So to give a definition, I define commonization as the introduction of three elements: shared property, peer production, and citizen self-governance into public administration institutions. Because shared property, peer production, and citizen self-governance are the three elements that characterize digital commons. And if I have time, let me just give an example to illustrate this. Imagine that you take a software or a database that is developed by and for public administration, and you will transform it and transform its public ownership into common ownership. This would allow citizens to contribute to its development and have a say in how, for example, the database or the software will evolve. And in France, a project like this was attempted with a geographic address database. It's one project that I analyzed in my thesis. And this database is used by everyone, from firefighters to Uber drivers and Amazon, that use this geographic address database. And in France, until 2010, only a government administration and the postal service that was privatized produced, used, and sold this database. And that was a problem, especially for a collective mapping association, which is called OpenStreetMap, that you maybe know, that proposed to turn this database into a digital commons with shared ownership, allowing citizens to contribute to the update of this database, and giving them a voice in the governance of the database, for example, to prevent its privatization. And they tried to transform this database into a common. And so to answer to your question, we can see that the commons overlap with co-production. For example, the citizen contribution to the enrichment of the resource alongside with public agent is a form of co-production. But there are also key differences. First, the idea of sharing or transferring the ownership from a public resource to citizen. That's something new compared to co-production. And then, of course, there is the concept of self-governance, where a citizen will be able to manage some public resources or services from their own perspective without or going beyond co-production with civil servants. And that's a new form of co-production where there is the self-governing agent, citizen that organize themselves.
Thank you. How can public administrators balance hierarchical structures with the decentralized governance of digital commons?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's complicated because it involves organizational structures that are deeply rooted in the administration as well as in the culture of public servant and senior official, especially in France. I will just give you an example from the case study of the address database. And some of my interviews said, I quote, we are civil servants, so we work and respect decisions of our senior official. We don't always know the ins and outs of the decision being made, end of quote. And on the other hand, there are people from OpenStreetMap, from this organization that have a more, let's say, horizontal way of working. And they say, I quote one of the citation, we aim for simplicity, directness, doing things from ourselves, which is quite different from the hierarchical culture and practices of people from inside the administration. But it's precisely because it's complicated that my research has been so interesting. It's about understanding how to reform and transform these hierarchical administrative practices. And to answer to your question, I'd say that there are three different situations, each requiring a different approach. The first is when public servants can participate in existing digital commons. For example, in France, public employees from administration contribute to Wikipedia. And in these cases, they have to follow the governance rules of the digital commons, right? In the second case, citizens can get involved in digital commons that are created by the administration, like the case I mentioned of the National Address Database. And this is where things get more complicated because the administration has to set up shared governance and share this power to decide. But as I mentioned, administrative rules and culture make it difficult. And there is a third solution that is pretty original and interesting. It has been implementing, for example, in Spain or in Italy through the concept of public commons partnerships. And they are different from public-private partnerships because the state doesn't predefine a list of requirements for a private company to follow. Instead, in public commons partnership, the state delegates part of the use, the property, and the governance of a public resource to a citizen community. That's, for example, what did the city of Barcelona with the second case study I analyzed in my article, which is the Decidim platform. So Decidim platform is a participatory democratic platform that allows the city to run consultation, participatory budget, and more. And however, the public servants who developed this platform didn't want it to be managed only by states or handed over to a private company through public-private partnerships. So because they believe that this democratic tool should be deployed and developed democratically by and for citizens. So starting with inside the administration, they create a community of citizens outside the administration, which later formed as an association. And then the administration transferred the ownership and the governance of the platform to the association through a public commons partnership. That's a real transformation of public action and open up like new avenues of ways to balance hierarchy and self-governance.
Okay. Thank you. How can governments ensure that the commonization of digital public goods benefits all citizens and does not exacerbate the digital divide?
Yeah, it's again a complex question. I think it's a question that arises for all co-production efforts. But it's even more paradoxical when it comes to digital co-production, because at the beginning, the efforts of digital co-production were set up with the promise that digital technology would make it easier for a citizen to access to democracy, to smooth the relationship between administration and citizen. But the sociology of digital practices has shown for a long time that participation inequalities are really strong and rather exacerbated online. So public authorities face this challenge, and so far I haven't seen a unique solution for this. In the case of Decidim, for example, they've implemented tools that are accessible for people that don't see or that are blind. They try also not to concentrate all the workspaces, discussion, and decision making online. They try also to make effort to combine with offline process and physical meetings. But it's hard to overcome structural causes like social inequalities or inequalities in cultural and economic capital, which plays a significant role in people's ability to participate to self-governance project or more broadly co-production project.
How can digital governance platforms like GitHub, Slack, and Meta Decidim be leveraged to enhance citizen participation in public decision-making?
This platform, which maybe I can say that it was interesting for me to develop a methodology to analyze those platforms, because in my research I used those platforms as a way to do what is called an ethnography, which means that you do ethnography but using online tools where the community works, interacts, discuss, etc. And it was interesting for me to use those platforms as a way to observe the community. But to answer more directly to your question, those platforms have two main advantages. So the first one is that they make debates, discussion, and decisions more public and transparent. This aspect may not necessarily boost participation, but it's clear that it enhances the democratic quality of public decision making. And secondly, those platforms like GitHub, Slack, or Meta Decidim allows for contribution of citizens without going through hierarchical structure. If I take the case of the national address database that I talked earlier, one of the public servants in charge of this database inside the administration realized that he could not establish shared governance of the project because the officials didn't want to share the power and the governance with citizens and especially people from OpenStreetMap. And what he did is that he opened a channel in Slack, and this make made it easier to organize and allow for citizen contribution, citizen decision making in a more flexible way. And it's because those spaces online are like unfamiliar to superiors and people from the hierarchy. So people can interact bypassing, let's say, the hierarchical structure, right? So it's a kind of democratization of the state from below, let's say.
My next question is, how can we design educational initiatives to encourage broader citizen participation in digital self-governance?
Hmm. Um, yeah, let's maybe one of the solution would be to do an educative policy by and for the digital commons. Um, One of the issue when people are educated to digital tools is that usually they are passive users of technology. They look videos, they scroll down, they stalk, but people usually have a passive way of interacting with digital tools. And if we go on more active pedagogy, we can teach children to become more active contributors to digital resources to understand how they work, and in some cases to go in the decision making on how those resources will work. For example, they could see how Wikipedia is built, how neutral and non-partisan information is created online, and even how the governance of Wikipedia works. There is in French a project that is called Wikidia that have been developed, and it allows children to um, not only play but develop like Wikipedia-like encyclopedia from 8 to 13 years. And it's really a good way for them to be to educate them to become active contributors to digital tools and not only passive. Of course, it will be a ambitious public policy for education. And of course, this will be, I guess, confronted or go against the interest of Google, Amazon, Facebook, that are really inside and have a lot of partnerships with scholar institutions or university institutions. But I would say that there are a lot of pedagogues that have studied how people, when they teach and they participate to commons, they become more active citizens that are capable to cooperate and to go beyond the difficulties to self-organize. So I would say to transform the educative policy to include more education through and for digital commons.
My last question is, what are the ethical considerations when balancing state control with citizen-led governance in digital public services?
Yeah, this brings us back to a point that I didn't mention earlier. It's that citizen-led governance, as you call, is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Um, and it can be problematic in some ways because some citizen communities can drift toward, let's say, authoritarian or exclusionary behavior. For example, there is nothing stopping a self-governing city community to develop and promote some racist idea or exclude people based on gender, race, or class. So that's why I think the state has an important role to play in being, let's say, like to guarantee the public interest and ensuring that citizen-led governance remained democratic, respect the human rights, etc. So there is that's the balance I see in the relation between the states and the commons. Of course, it's need to create a whole set of new institutional relation between the state and the commons. raising huge ethical and also political questions concerning distribution of power. That's what makes this topic so stimulating. But I believe that the commons can offer a way to rethink the states outside of the neoliberal framework, so that it serves not the cause of free and unchallenged competition, but rather the free and voluntary cooperation. So the state could more support cooperation than competition.
My last question is do you have anything additional you want to share regarding your article and to our audience?
Yeah, maybe we didn't talk about the main people that I study, which are bureaucratic entrepreneurs. And one thing that I've learned is that they have a really important role in what I've called the commonization of the state. The attempt to transform public administration that I've studied, it was in France, in the US, in Ecuador, and in Spain. The two case studies that I analyzed are in France and in Spain. There were three key factors that make them happen. The first one was the general context that favors administrative reforms and citizen demand for more democracy. And on those countries, there are a strong commons and digital commons movement. A second factor important were that usually there was support from progressive governments that backs this type of reform. And the third factor that was really important in the case study I analyzed was the presence of what I've called bureaucratic entrepreneurs who push for the commonization of public services and goods from within the administration. And they have a lot of roles. They built a reformist discourse to explain the importance of commonization of public services, whether for democracy, administrative efficiency, or cost reduction. You have, for example, Beth Novak in the US that wrote a book in 2009 that is called Wiki Government. And she was in charge of the open government policy of Barack Obama at the time he was president. And she built a reformist discourse to explain why transforming some administration with the logic of Wikipedia can enhance democracy and make the administration more efficiency and cost reduction. And second, they try to build support and avoid blame. That's something like classical in public administration literature. But one last thing interesting that I saw is that when the resisting was too strong, sometimes they have to go through what I've called legal hacking. Legal hacking involves using embedding some existing laws or public instruments to their advantage. For example, in the case of Decidim, this democratic platform that is self-governed by the association, they had to subcontract the platform development to external providers through a public-private partnership. But remember, they were really criticizing public-private partnerships. So to make it work for them and to bend them to their advantage, they write in a certain way this public-private partnership. They divided the project into smaller lots to prevent large IT corporation to win this project. They set up requirements like, for example, have a solid experience in developing open source software to keep those big companies out. So they did legal hacking to transform laws and institutions from within to bend them to their advantage. So that was a pretty much important thing to analyze when I analyze this transformation of the states for and by the digital commons. And maybe a last thing I could say is that nowadays we can see that big players and big actors from the what we can call digital capitalism that developed private tools like AI, for example, are entering the state, right? If you take in the US, Elon Musk. And I think that commons and digital commons and the transformation of the state through digital commons can offer an alternative way to transform state. Not only saying we will rebuild the state as a strong state, not only saying that the state have to be privatized, but to think about a third way where the state is no longer a hierarchical institution or a privatized one, but that stimulates cooperation for outside and also incorporating logic of cooperation from inside and in its own logics.
Thank you for the fascinating conversation and for your important contribution to PAR. And thank you to our listeners. We look forward to next time with you, and when we will continue to examine the intersection of theory and practice of administration. Please let us know how we are doing. You can email us at par.editors@gmail.com and find us on Spotify, X, and LinkedIn. On Par is made possible by ASPA and our editorial team. With special thanks for podcast production to Jessica Rao, Par editorial assistant.